Hello and welcome to this Constitution Unit seminar. I'm Alan Rennick, Deputy Director of the Constitution Unit, and today we're talking about devolution and local government reform in England. The UK government has promised a devolution revolution for England. It published a white paper at the end of last year, setting out plans to roll out so-called strategic authorities, such as combined mayoral authorities across the whole of England, and also to replace two-tier local government where it exists with unitary councils. Since then, 6 priority areas for devolution have been announced, and two-tier areas across the country have been frantically working up plans for unitarisation. At the same time, there are also big changes to how local and strategic authorities are financed, which ministers say will free up local elected representatives to make decisions for their areas. And government wants to empower communities at the very local level as well. So a great deal is happening, and indeed, we hear that the bill on these matters will be published just in the next few hours. So it's a very important and valuable moment to be discussing these issues. There are many questions that are raised by all that is happening. Some of these questions, of course, concern the effective delivery of local public services and economic development. But we might also ask about how the changes will affect the quality of local democracy and how they'll change the place of local government in the wider constitutional structure. So, to explore such questions, we're joined today by 3 excellent speakers. Arianna Giovannini is Professor of Political Sociology at the University of Urbino in Italy and an expert on local government, especially in England. She has spent much of her career at UK universities, and she's a former director of the think tank IPPR North. Bella Sankey is a Labour councillor, leader of Brighton and Hove City Council, and also deputy leader of the Local Government Association Labour Group. By way of context, it's perhaps useful to note that Brighton and Hove is already a unitary authority, and it might prefer to stay more or less as it is. But its population is also a bit below the government's indicative minimum of 500,000 people for unitary authorities, and it's very much in discussion with neighbouring councils about what form unitarisation across Sussex as a whole might take. And also Sussex is one of the priority areas for new devolution deals, and we'll be having elections for a new Sussex mayor in May next year. And finally, Roger Gough was, until this year's May elections, a Conservative councillor and leader of Kent County Council. And so most of Kent is currently in two-tier structure. So again, there are many discussions underway there about possible unitary geographies. And there's also an expectation that Kent as a whole will become a mayoral strategic authority a little bit further down the line. So, Arianna, Bella, and Roger, many thanks for joining us today. Welcome to you all. The plan is that each of the speakers will make opening remarks, after which we'll have some discussion on the panel, and then we'll open the floor to your questions. Questions will be gathered by Tom Fleming. So if you do have a question that you'd like to put to the panel, please write it in the Q&A function here on Zoom, and Tom will then select a broad range of the questions and read them out. If you'd like to ask a question anonymously, you can do that just by indicating it when you submit your question. And let me also finally note that the whole session, including the Q&A, is being recorded and will be posted online on the Constitution Unit website, our YouTube channel, and our podcast feed after the event. So you might just want to take that into account when deciding whether to ask your question anonymously or not. So that's more than enough from me. I will hand straight over to Arianna to get us going.
Thanks very much, Alan, and thanks very much, well, first of all, for inviting me to take part in this discussion. As you were saying, I think our chat and discussion today couldn't be more timely, as the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill is to be introduced in this House of Commons just this afternoon. So it's hard to predict what is going to be in there, but which makes our job a little bit more challenging today. But I think that my aim in this opening remark is just to try and focus on a few key points that relate to the way in which we could call it the new direction of travel on devolution introduced by the new government might affect the shape, relationship, and substance of subnational governance in England, and as a result also of local democracy. So, as I was saying, it's certainly too early to kind of speculate about what might be included in the new bill. But what we can do is kind of reflect a bit retrospectively on what we know. And the main point of reference here for us is obviously the English devolution white paper that was published last December. So if we look at that, we can say first that certainly the paper set the bar very high in terms of its devolution ambitions, and this is kind of summarized by its commitment to the principle of devolution by default. It is a very big and very welcome commitment. Certainly, this was can be seen as welcome news especially because, as we know, England is one of the most centralized and regionally unequal countries in the world, and pressing ahead on devolution is essential to address both these issues. But here, yet, it is also true, and here I add a note of caution because the bill might change these things. While the English devolution white paper, we could say, got the diagnosis right, focusing on the need to change center-local relations, moving towards a kind of a more genuine form of partnership between different levels of government. It is also true that if we look at the details of the English devolution white paper, we see that there were a lot of prescriptions coming pretty much from the top down and imposed on subnational governance bodies. So if we look at this from a constitutional perspective, I think that it shows that there is a sort of a persistence, or almost like a form of an automatic reflex in response to change. And this is when the key principle of the British political tradition continue to come back in. And so this is also related to the kind of a long-standing reluctance to truly let go of power, which in my view would also mean embracing the principle of subsidiarity that characterizes this type of approach. If we think of what devolution is for, what is the purpose of devolution, as opposed to the centralization or the concentration, devolution should be about bringing politics, decision-making, and public services closer to the people. And so it is in this sense that devolution is very much is very closely allied to the principle of subsidiarity, which essentially says that governance is the most effective and democratic when decisions are made as close as possible to the communities affected. So in practice, this means that for some strategic policy areas, such as transport, for example, a larger regional scale might be the most appropriate, but also for other areas of policy, such as day-to-day and also day-to-day service provision, the local or even the community level could work much better. So if we follow this logic and try to apply to the idea of devolution by default that was at the core of the white paper, this essentially would mean avoiding to put any limit to the extent or level to which power can be passed down. And yet, in practice, in the English devolution white paper, we saw a lot of examples that seems to suggest that, for the most part, at the end of the day, it is Whitehall that is still calling most of the shots. So we can see, for example, in the white paper that there were pledges to widen and deepen devolution and make it available through a flexible approach and incrementally to all areas in England, while also enhancing the power of metro mayors and committing to put a new devolution framework into statute. Again, this is all welcome news, but we should also look maybe in a critical perspective at this very strong focus on mayoral combined authorities. Don't get me wrong, I'm not against them, absolutely not. We have seen in practice that they can achieve very, very good things. But it is also true that, again, if we look at the practice, the landscape is very unequal and uneven. We know that not all mayoral combined authorities are equal. We have the examples of the trailblazers against, for example, the newest sort of combined or strategic authorities, as they're called now. But we also know that at the individual level, different mayors carry different weight. And this was clearly shown, for example, by a recent report from the Heseltine Institute co-authored by my friends and colleagues Paul Anderson and Tom Arnold. And second, there is also a risk that, as the case, for example, of devolution in Scotland clearly illustrate, that this approach could sort of instigate a process of devolution that stops at the mayoral combined authority level. And this would be at the expenses of local government, for example, and also with a potential negative effect on subnational governance relations and local democracy again. Again, this I'm not against the focus on mayoral combined authorities and metro mayors, but we should, in my view, there is also a need to make sure that this doesn't go at the detriment of the powers and the autonomy of local authorities. Another example relates to the white paper's pledge to reset central-local relations and the end of what they call in the white paper a parent-child relationship between central and local government that has long characterized central-local relations. Again, here I think that the diagnosis is absolutely correct. There is a need to stop this kind of hierarchical top-down sort of relationship, but the white paper didn't seem to be matched by plans for radical reform that are actually required to achieve this. And if we look at the example of local government reorganization, well, this is a clear case in point. The introduction of large unitary authorities can be seen as a pragmatic attempt at finishing the job of, for example, simplifying local government structure developed incrementally since the Redcliffe-Maud report in 1969. But it is also true that imposing the creation of authorities that cover a population of about 500,000 inhabitants seems to be driven, or could be seen as be driven by a need to actually streamline local government structure in a way that plays mostly in the interest of the center and that has not been discussed or negotiated in an in-depth manner with the local leaders that are operating in these areas. So in some areas, for example, unitarization might be appealing for local authorities and might work really well, but this is not necessarily the case. And in other areas, unitarization could, and we see also examples of this in practice, is not going down easily and could actually generate negative effects. From a political point of view, this kind of reform is, first of all, bound to breed conflicts between counties, which see it as an opportunity to strengthen their role, and districts, which, of course, are not keen to be abolished. And then from a policy and service delivery perspective, this approach, and this is also what the English devolution white paper claims, it claims that larger authorities can lead to better outcomes, save money, and this money can be reinvested in public services and improve accountability with fewer politicians. But again, if we look at the research that has been produced on this issue, well, research has repeatedly shown that there is very little evidence that having fewer, larger councils makes local government automatically or necessarily more efficient, and also that it reduces costs. So also we should also keep thinking of the process of unitarization. We should also keep in mind that English local government units are already very, very large by international standards, and unitarization will further announce this trend. Essentially, the risk here is that of taking the local out of local government. And so in a context, in a political and social context that is marked by very low turnout rates in local elections, declining trust in politics, and growing support for populism, I think that pushing local government institutions further away from the local communities that they are elected to serve could have profound democratic consequences. And so all of this seems to suggest, or seems to actually go against the idea of devolution by default, and actually seems to circumvent that principle of subsidiarity, and that reference to the principle of subsidiarity I began with. So I think that, having a new government, and here I don't really think it matters, the political color of the government, but having a new government of whatever stripes that is actually committed to devolution, as the current one seems to be, could have, and the publication of the white paper really offered an opportunity to put an end to decades of partial attempts that we've seen in the past. And so there was really a real opportunity here to deliver finally a completely new way of governing England, aligning a commitment to devolution with a radical reset of central local relations. But again, as I said, in my view, there were the English devolution white paper got the diagnosis right, but it wasn't ambitious enough in terms of putting into practice those very ideas and principles it's included. And so we will see what happens with the bill. Maybe the bill will address these issues. I really hope so. But again, this is something that we will discuss in the coming day. If I still have a minute and I can conclude just on a wider point on the
Just very quickly,
Constitution.
Ariana. Yeah.
Okay, I can also conclude here if you prefer, Alan. It's fine.
But perhaps if you keep your wider point for later on, then we
Okay,
can
no problem
make
at
sure we
all.
get to it. But
Apologies.
keen to no, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. Lots to get our teeth into there. So really helpful start. Thank you. Bella, shall we go to you next?
Thanks very much, Alan, and thank you, Ariana, for kicking us off so brilliantly there. Good afternoon, everybody. Fantastic to see so many people joining this session. As Alan says, my name is Bella Sankey. I'm the leader of Brighton and Hove City Council and also the deputy leader of the Labour group on the Local Government Association. So yes, this is incredibly timely from my perspective. How exciting that today the government is introducing the English Devolution and Community Empowerment Bill. This was in the Labour Party's manifesto at the last election to deepen devolution. And it's very clear from the white paper, and I think the direction of travel and what we've heard from government over the past year, that they are very much wanting to move towards a position of devolution by default. We obviously at the moment have a pretty uneven situation in the country whereby there has been some, pretty significant moves towards devolution in parts of England, particularly maybe more in the north. And then you obviously have the position in the devolved nations where we've seen, incredibly significant devolution of powers over the last few decades. And then you have areas like mine in the southeast where we have really seen nothing in terms of devolution. And I suppose I'd start my contribution by saying that as somebody who became a local authority leader, a leader of a unitary authority just over 2 years ago, one of the biggest surprises to me coming into this role was that yes, I have this fantastic council that delivers over 700 services in my brilliant city of Brighton and Hove, but there's currently nothing in place, no mechanism, no requirements really of government to ensure that there is regional cooperation going on in the area that that my city exists within, so Sussex. And that was a real shock and a real surprise to me because, really, if you think about how we arrange ourselves and structure ourselves, the things that we need to deliver, a less unequal society, a society that is, driven by inclusive growth, a society that is providing the houses that are needed for people, and the progress that we need to deliver in residents' lives, we need to join up. Train services, roads, so much about our infrastructure, health services, so much doesn't really correspond to local authority boundaries where they currently exist. To me, it was such a surprise that there wasn't more of a strategic regional body that would help us to have those important conversations that can only take place, I would say, at a regional level, to ensure there is the right infrastructure, the right strategy in place to deliver progress for our residents and our communities and for our businesses. So I think this is massively overdue. I'm very excited that we were selected as one of the government's areas to go into the priority programme. This is something that local government has essentially been asking government to do for a really long time. So, the Local Government Association, of which I'm part, has been lobbying for many years for greater devolution. And so I think this is really exciting, and I completely understand, disappointment of areas that have not been included in the programme. I know that the government is seriously considering a second round of devolution areas within this parliament, and I think that that is really welcome. And I suppose that the things I would say about the government's approach and what was in the white paper, and I think what we're going to see in today's bill, is that I think it's really welcome to talk about devolution by default. It makes no sense from a sort of national missions perspective to have areas of the country with such unequal arrangements in terms of devolution. You can completely understand from a central government perspective that you want a more uniform system. I think it's welcome, therefore, that we're moving away from a deals-based approach into something that is more standardized. And I think that makes complete sense. I'm really excited by what was in the white paper in terms of the vision and the mission. Clearly, government wants to deepen devolution in the areas that already have it. So, talk of a right to request, the idea that a regional body could say to request powers currently exercised by central government is huge in a system, I think Alan explained at the outset, that is currently so centralized. So I think that is really exciting. And I think the potential for sort of creativity, for thinking anew about how we do things and how we deliver change and progress is fantastic. I think there's a massive opportunity to align public service delivery. So, in our area of Sussex, so there's Brighton and Hove and East Sussex and West Sussex, and it's all of us that are in this devolution priority programme that will be creating a strategic authority. We already have a police force that operates on a pan-Sussex basis, and we have a health system that does as well. So the potential to kind of join up thinking and really start to make much more strategic decisions, whether that's around reducing health inequalities, whether it's about planning our affordable housing in a much more joined up way, to help deliver on health inequality, the potential to join all of that up, I think, is incredible. And really, really welcome. And I think that's a really valuable part of the approach that the government's taking. And I think, to me, devolution is a no-brainer. I spend a lot of time working with leaders in areas that have already devolved, and I can see their hunger to go further, but I can also see the results that they're already generating. The fact that Greater Manchester has one of the fastest growing economies in the whole of Europe, I think is massive testament to the work that's gone on there between local leaders and the mayor, whether that's on the bus network or on bringing investment in. If you look at what Bradford is now doing on skills, we can already see the results. The evidence is plain to see. So, how exciting that we're now, able to get on with it and, bringing more areas into the Devo revolution.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bella. And over to Roger.
Thank you, Alan. Good afternoon, everyone. I am, as was mentioned, I'm Roger Goff. I was for 5.5 years the leader of Kent County Council. And in that role, we did, as a collective of councils across Kent and Medway, very much cross-party, work towards a devolution bid. It was something to which I was personally very committed, and we believed very strongly that Kent, as a place with historic identity, roughly the right sort of population, around 2 million, and coterminous public services, was ideally set up for it. For reasons that remain an utter mystery to me, we were not admitted to the devolution priority programme and continue to await that. I promised Alan I would only rail about that subject once, so consider that done. But I want to start by going back to some remarks by Jim McMahon at the LGA conference back in October 2024, where he cast devolution very much in constitutional terms. There's a bigger prize, he said, for England to be seen as first among equals under a devolution settlement, and that this was to be achieved by a structured approach with no orphan areas. So the question in part is, how far are we actually going down that road? Because I think when I heard him say that, I was very struck by it, and I thought there was an impressive coherence to the idea. Why we in Kent, certainly I as leader, was so keen to go for devolution is partly that the aim, and it touches a little bit on what Bella just mentioned, was to rebuild a strategic authority, but something which has really been gutted, frankly, by both financial pressures and legislative changes over the last 15 years. And above all, to have something that was separated out from the pressures on people services, adult social care, children's services, and the like, which are the things that are eating upper tier local authorities alive at the moment. And that therefore something which was actually separated from that and could pursue that strategic agenda, to my mind, made a great deal of sense. Now, that's perhaps a slightly jerry-built solution and justification for going about that, but nonetheless, I think it was a realistic one. It fitted actually with the direction of travel across administrations. You know, I'd first put in an application for mayoral devolution during the previous administration, and indeed we then took it up again under the more comprehensive programme set out under this one. I think there's an interesting point which we may come back to, which is devolution under whichever government has a whole number of faces. Is it about economic development? Is it about local democracy? Is it about the constitutional settlement, or indeed a whole number of other things as well? And I think, again, it's interesting to explore a little bit how much each of those plays a part in what we will see. Now, sticking for the moment with the white paper, because as Arianna mentioned, we haven't seen the bill yet. I think there are a number of important points about those proposals which are very positive. So the move towards a uniform approach as opposed to the deals-based approach, and I agree very much with Bella on that. That should enable us also then to see a more uniform and constitutionally based status for the mayoral authorities embedded in legislation. I think we do see an answer to the question about strategic decision-making and capacity. The move towards what are called integrated settlements is good, though I think perhaps limited, but good. There is a link to something else the government is doing, which is the restoration of strategic planning. Something of an absent guest, actually, in the first round of mayoral devolution under the previous administration. Arguably, it could be done separately, but there is actually a tremendous logic to that as part of the powers brought together under the mayoral strategic authorities. And then, again, picking up on a point Bella mentioned, alignment of services, what under the previous Labour government was called total place, also known as public service reform, potentially a really important area. So I think you've got to look at all those different aspects together and then say, how far are we going down that path? Answering the kind of exam question that Alan set for us in three parts. Firstly, what's the impact on delivery of public services? Now, in a way, devolution is separate from a big chunk of that. It doesn't touch the major local government public services, which I mentioned earlier on, the things which are actually putting intense pressure on councils. There is a separate reform agenda for that, albeit one which I think is being pursued rather patchily. And I mention those pressures because they also have an important impact on the quality of local democracy, because of the issue of, in effect, invisible services chewing up a huge amount of what is actually the most visible of taxes in how it's raised. Coming back to the issue of public service reform, government is committed to it. There's a number of pointers to that in the white paper, but the steps in the direction are certainly a little bit tentative. The direction is clear, but the timeline not. It's not quite clear at what level this will play out. What is the role between mayors on the one side, who have few powers at the moment in the main areas that you'd be looking at for public service reform, though the MSA role in relation to the health duty in the devolution white paper takes you a little bit of a way there. And then on the other hand, the councils. There is in the NHS 10-year plan, which of course came out last week, a role for local authorities in developing neighbourhood health plans, and selected strategic authorities, starting with Greater Manchester, as prevention demonstrators. An important point is to ensure coterminosity between the health, in particular, the health geography and the mayoral strategic authority geography, which was rather thrown into doubt by all the upheavals in the world of integrated care boards, but appears to have survived that. But we will see exactly how that plays out. On the impact on the quality of local democracy, I think some of it's in the eye of the beholder. So there are very different views about what the nature or the impact of a mayor is on democratic choice locally, and similarly local government reform, which, it must be said, came into the picture rather late, certainly in the very comprehensive form that we now see it. I think there is a big danger, actually, that the arguments which are taking place, I think, up and down the country about the size and number of unitaries, in many cases, basically a good old-fashioned county district battle or variations on that theme, may well take the eye off the ball of achieving things like public service reform, or indeed making LGR about anything other than getting some new structures across the line with a particular population. In any case, I think there is a whole amount of work to be done in terms, and again, we'll see what the bill says about this, in terms of the other key reforms that go alongside this, such as the Local Public Accounts Committee, how are they embedded, are they properly resourced, and indeed how mayors in particular are scrutinised. Similarly, community power, the levels of activity below those unitary authorities. Again, I think we wait to see what the bill has to say, but there may well be, I think, a reliance on local area committees as a way through that. Finally, on the constitutional issues, I think on the positive side, as I say, it looks as though there'll be a greater clarity about the legal basis for MSAs and for mayors. Frankly, the clearer the position is on this, and the more it is set out in primary legislation, and how they can pull down powers, how that will be decided, the more of that, the better. But I think there are still some real challenges. Above all, the powers of the new authorities are still actually relatively limited. Devolution doesn't create an equivalence between the different bodies who are now represented on the Council of Nations and Regions. Even as a starting point, I think we'd need much bigger integrated settlements to bring that into being. So in spite of Jim McMahon's ambitions, I think we're quite a long way from English devolution basically answering the West Lothian question. The second question, I think, is what is the role of local government in all of this as opposed to mayors? When we look at the mayoral council, when we look at the Council of Nations and Regions, we have a rather limited looking leaders council sitting alongside that. And where actually you address some of those big service issues in local government and how that becomes part of the constitutional architecture is not clear. In many ways, it's the flip side of the separation I highlighted earlier on between core traditional local government services and that strategic placemaking role, which is what the mayors will really be doing. If you look much further ahead, it seems to me that either local government will have a stronger voice in all of this at a national level, or the mayors will involve themselves much more in the affairs of local government. There are some signs from how things evolved under the previous administration, at least, that we may be more likely to see the latter. So the current position, whilst it's very promising in many ways, doesn't look to me like a stable equilibrium. But then we were always told, weren't we, that devolution is a process, not an event. And I think that will prove to be true also for English devolution. I'll leave it there.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So 3 really crunchy contributions there, all with lots of things for us to get our teeth into. I see we've had some questions submitted already, so many thanks for that. But now is very much the chance, the time to submit your questions. I see many people in the audience who have much more expertise on these matters than I do. So I'm very much looking forward to hearing the questions that you raise. But while you're thinking about your questions and putting them into the Q&A function, let me get a bit of conversation going on the panel. And that theme that Roger was touching on towards the end there, and that Arianna very much emphasized at the start, is one that I think it would be good to explore a little bit further around the kind of balance between strategic aims and ensuring authorities that are large enough to deliver regional ambitions. And Bella very much emphasized the importance of joining up and the need for local authorities to join up in order to achieve strategic ambitions. But on the other hand, the goal of community empowerment and ensuring that local democracy is as vibrant as possible. And certainly my reading of the white paper, and it sounds like it also Arianna's reading of the white paper, is that the community empowerment end of it felt a little bit underpowered, and there wasn't terribly much in there about that. And the shift towards larger local authority units would seem to be moving away from local democracy that is really rooted in communities and that people can feel a connection with. So I wonder, Bella and Roger, if you could pick up that challenge a little bit. Has the government got the balance between these imperatives right so far? And if not, what more might need to be done, particularly on the community empowerment side and the local democracy side in order to do things better? So maybe Bella first and Roger, and then Arianna. It would be great to bring you back in as well.
Thanks, Alan. And I think you raise a really important question around community empowerment. Local government is the champion of local places. And when local government is done well, I think we demonstrate that we can be responsive to residents. We can really get under the skin of our communities and understand what they need and sort of wrap around them. We are the experts in doing preventative work so that issues and problems that might otherwise escalate and put pressure on the system elsewhere, whether it's the NHS or wherever, can be dealt with if local government is empowered to do that and if it's truly local. As somebody that leads a unitary authority currently, which has 280,000 people in Brighton Hove, I know that some of my colleagues in other parts of the country that run smaller sized councils can feel that even a council of our size may be too big, maybe too remote. I can say very confidently that I think a council of my size is able to be really close and connected to communities. That's certainly the case in the city. I think it's absolutely possible it would be possible for Brighton Hove to exist on a bit of a bigger footprint and still feel that closeness and that connection. And a lot of that is about ensuring that as a council, you've got the right mechanisms in place, that you are genuinely being responsive and ensuring that you're listening to community voice and deeply listening to it. I think all of that is possible, even with the government's suggestion of authorities existing on a bit of a bigger scale. I think the government, from what I can see, is thinking really hard about what that local connection needs to look like under these reformed arrangements. And I think we can expect to see some more thinking of that in the bill, whether it's communities being able to be more involved in community asset transfer, some of that real kind of bottom-up grassroots empowerment that I think everyone universally really wants to see. One of the things I know that the Minister Jim McMahon has observed and I've discussed with him is how with the kind of over centralization of Whitehall, you currently have a system where government and ministers are often asked to make, decisions that really are best taken in local places. And I think you're going to see in the bill, government pushing that back out to local places, which I think is really welcome. I think there probably, will need to be some thinking and some further consultation about how we make that real and how these new arrangements ensure that in every place there is that strong local connection. But I think the government is really open and is listening on that front.
Thanks very much. Roger?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. Well, firstly, I agree that what there was in the white paper in this area, in the sort of community empowerment area, if you like, was very underpowered. It was a little bit of an afterthought in relation to the big emphasis, which started with the focus on the mayors, and then, of course, as I say, local government reorganisation came in a much stronger form than had previously been indicated in the final stages of the white paper being produced. We may know more, of course, within the hour if there are, as to what provisions there are on this within the bill. I think it's one of the interesting things to look out for. I think there is also, I think we're due at some point. I don't think it's even clear whether it would be a white or a green paper, but on this, on the, again, the community power dimensions of this. I don't think in principle there is a contradiction between taking the two forward, but it is tricky to get it right. There is a reason why we have, across many areas of the country, two-tier government, which is, I think there are genuinely differences between services which are very, very local and services which are big and strategic and possibly even have economies of scale. And I think one of the things you're going to see in the debates, or I think we're already seeing in the debates over the new local authority boundaries, is arguments about what happens when you disaggregate some of those very big services, particularly in a county like the one I used to lead. Kent is the biggest county council area in the country, 1.6 million people, but you have a number of other areas almost as big. And what happens when you disaggregate those is very different from unitarisation in, let's say, a Wiltshire or a Cornwall or whatever. So I think there is a genuine debate to be had about that. I think one of the key things will also be, what are the internal structures that you will see within any new unitary authority? I suspect that you'll probably see some requirements on those, quite possibly within the bill. I mentioned, the sort of local area committees model. Some of that might even plug into the public service reform dimension, because it fits in a little bit with the neighbourhood health plans and so on that are talked about in the NHS 10-year plan. So no contradiction in principle. A larger organisation can, if it structures itself right, decentralise internally. And then you need to work very hard on getting those structures right. But there's a tension within it. I think we've got to recognise that, and I think it's so far been somewhat underplayed.
Interesting. And Arianna, I guess I'm wondering what kind of concrete things you're hoping to see in the bill in order to beef up this part of the overall package a little bit further.
Well, I think that, as it has been mentioned earlier on, I think we need to see, if we want to see real change from what has been happening until now, devolution has to have a clear way forward. And I think that having setting devolution structure into statute would really be an important thing to see, so that not the next government of whatever color might come in and change things as they are. I think this constant kind of change of structures, level, focus on different scales is one of the main issues that has made the path of devolution in England very erratic so far. The other thing that I would really like to see in the English in the bill more broadly is really what I was mentioning in my opening remark. The diagnosis is right. The government understands clearly what needs to be done, change in center-local relations in a way that makes them more equal and in a way that allows subnational governance level to have a real input into whatever decisions are made by the center that actually affect them. Well, really have been bold enough to do that in practice, not just in words, but in practice. And so empowering all levels of government without imposing things or structures from the top down, which essentially boils down to two things. What I was mentioning earlier on, and I think reflects very much what both Roger and Bella said in their remarks, and that is embracing the principle of subsidiarities. Different things and different powers can be passed down at different levels. The main priority shouldn't be who is going to be the recipient of power, but where can power be placed so that it can benefit local communities in the most effective way. So having something, the principle of subsidiarity is something that is much talked about, but really difficult to put in practice in a context like the UK, where there is this tendency to keep power at the center.
And do you have thoughts, Arianna, on democracy at the strategic authority level? So Roger touched upon this a little bit, but it's quite striking that we've been rolling out a model of democracy that is quite different from what we have at national level. So with mayors at the centre, kind of equivalent to having a presidential system, which
Yes.
most people think is a very undesirable kind of a system at national level because it just leads to lots of instability, too much power in the hands of one person. And there are also questions, again, that Roger mentioned around the accountability of mayors and the structures around that. Do you have thoughts, Ariana, on what we should see in terms of democracy at that level as well?
I think the question of accountability is an essential one to be addressed. There has been a lot of academic discussion on this, but also in the world of practice, there has been a lot of focus on like, if we want to make this new structure working, we need to make sure that there is a system of a proper system of accountability in place. So definitely addressing that would be very, very important. The question of how metro mayors are elected, I don't have necessarily a set view on this. I think I understand where the choice came from in the sense that the idea was to create a clear leadership figure, so directly elected, but working within representatives of within the combined authority of local council that can in some way at least counterbalance that risk of having too much power into the hands of a single figure. But if we look at what has been happening in the past years, in some combined authorities, we've also seen that things can go in the wrong direction there again. So probably, again, this leads back to the point on accountability, creating a system that is kind of fit for the future in the sense that can be held accountable and can function in a way that that strengthens local democracy rather than creating rather than putting challenges to it.
Roger, do you have further kind of concrete thoughts on how to design a mayoral combined authority in order to ensure democracy at that level is working as well as possible?
Well, I think the point that Ariana has just made about getting those accountability structures, and I think a lot of the emphasis at the moment is being put on local public accounts committees. That's been an important part of it. I think if we go down that route, which we should, then they need to be very properly resourced. And I think you also need to ensure that there's a real separation between the role, because there's an ambiguous role in some ways for the constituent authorities, which are on the one side, they will be sitting often in the mayoral strategic authority as, under many of the models, certainly cabinet members in effect for particular areas, certainly co-decision makers. And yet within those councils and other parts of the local political landscape, you've got to have effective independent scrutiny of the mayor. So I think those are really quite critical things to get right. I think the bit which strikes me as interesting looking forward is how much instability there might be in the relationships and the role that the mayor will play. Because I think we were talking amongst ourselves, I think, a little bit before we kind of came on air about this question as to whether you're recreating two-tier at a higher level. Now, government's been very insistent that that is not the case. And in one sense, fair enough, because the mayor has a set of quite limited high-level strategic roles. And so, for instance, Andy Burnham, as the mayor of Greater Manchester, with a population from memory of about 2.3 million, actually had a much smaller budget than, say, Kent County Council, because all those big, heavy-duty people services are not within it. So, in a sense, it's very different from the two-tier dynamic of the past. I suspect the challenge is going to be, for all the reasons I've talked about, that mayors may over time get themselves somewhat more involved with what happens in terms of some of those other core local areas. And that's where I think you run into real problems. So I think if you got it right in terms of the scrutiny at the moment, you're okay. Individuals can always go wrong and so on, and you have to test out the mechanisms under those circumstances. But I think if the lines get blurred between what the mayor is doing and what the constituent authorities are doing, then I think it gets a lot more difficult.
Mm. And Bella, you're going to have a mayor in 10 months' time or so. Are you and if the polling is right and the current political trends are right, potentially of a very different political stripe from Brighton and Hove. Are you satisfied that that model is going to work and that democratic control and accountability will function effectively?
Thanks, Alan, for the question. And I'm going to start by saying I don't accept that political analysis whatsoever. I think we're very much in
Of course.
contention in this region. I think we could have a similar potential sort of breakdown as we've had in the west of England with the election of Helen Godwin, because we are a diverse area politically, but actually moving more in our direction than the opposite, I would say.
Just
So we're
before
going
you
to
get on
be,
to the rest of the question, actually,
yeah.
just on that, are you hoping that the government might change the electoral system for mayors back to the supplementary vote in order to
So
ensure that
it's a really good question, and I do support the supplementary vote system. Reason being, I think when you are electing an individual, a representative on the scale that these mayoral strategic authorities exist, you referenced the size of Greater Manchester. In Sussex, we're 1.7 million. Roger mentioned the size of Kent. You know, these are sizable areas. And I think as far as possible, you know, a system that is trying to exist on such a big footprint where there is inevitably going to be so much sort of political diversity, identity diversity, geographic diversity, to try and elect someone that where there is, I think under the supplementary vote system, you know, more of a trying to find some sort of consensus or some, you know, greater level of agreement. I think makes sense, and I've made that my view very clear to government, and you know, and I know others feel the same. So I do support that. But coming back to I suppose the sort of question around, you know, how this will work, you know, I think it's important to look at the fact we already have places where there are people of different political traditions all having to coexist within a mayoral combined authority. And from the evidence I've seen and from the conversations that I have had, actually what that means in practice is people put the politics to one side and you work in order to deliver for your place. And actually you need to find common cause, you need to find areas of agreement, and you need to, you know, demonstrate progress to people. And I think there are some good examples of that. I think that the way that the government is going about trying to set up these more uniform structures where there will be clear representation from local authorities sat around the table with the mayor. So you are, you know, working towards that kind of collective decision making, trying to find consensus, I think is really sensible. In my own area, I think it, you know, one of the points I've made about thinking about how we go about local government reorganisation in a way that then kind of speaks to our what will be our new mayoral system. I think that means there's a case for having unitaries that maybe better reflect the different geographical identities. So we have, you know, we're a city in an area where there's, you know, clear sort of coastal urban communities and then more rural, you know, villages and towns. And I think what would make sense for our place is 5 unitaries that then all meet around the strategic authority and make decisions and bring that representation from those places and with their unique identities. But, you know, that's all currently in play and in discussion as we prepare our final submissions for September. So I think, you know, clearly it can be done. Clearly it is working well in other places. And I think the way that the government's going about structuring this will actually lend itself to that positive, you know, co-working across local areas and across political parties where that's needed.
Terrific, thank you. Let's bring Tom back on screen and go to audience questions. We've had lots of terrific questions submitted. Tom tells me we should have enough for 3 rounds of 3 questions each. So let's see if we can get that in the next 20 minutes with reasonably speedy answers if we can. So Tom, over to you for the first round.
All right, thanks very much, Alan. So in this round, we've got 3 questions that are all to some extent around the idea of mayors and combined authorities. So the first question from Chris Thompson asks, what do the panel think is the real empowering factor in the devolution picture? Is it the mayor, or is it the power of collaboration between regional actors? And so is the role of the mayor overplayed? Matthew Dinn says that a key role of the Metro Mayor has been to promote their combined authority and to lobby central government and to generate media attention. This has no doubt been easier given the smaller number of combined authorities thus far. So will the expansion of their number end up actually limiting their role given the more crowded field for attention? And then Sophie Jones asks, is there any risk that the mayoral model weakens trust in national political institutions by incentivizing local leaders to build support through rhetoric that paints national government as out of touch with local concerns?
Great questions. Excellent. Roger, I don't think we've started with you yet. Do you want to start off on this round?
Sure, I'll try and keep the answers short. What is the real source of empowerment? I think under the existing model, it probably is the mayor, and it's the concentration of strategic powers there. I think if we see further advances in some of the areas of public service reform, and that requires a whole lot of changes and letting go by government, etc., 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 then you could see something which was actually much more broadly based. So a distinction between where we are at this moment and where we might be. Promoting and lobbying, will the expansion limit the impact of that? Yeah, I think it probably will, because there'll be more people fighting for a limited amount of airtime, if you like. Hopefully, the offset to that is actually having more local power, genuine strategic power at a local level. But I think the impact of that will be. And the rhetoric, local versus national, a lot of that goes on anyway, but I think there will be a platform again for those who are directly elected and perhaps have a somewhat higher profile to push that more strongly. So we've seen it already in the past. You remember Andy Burnham's standoff with the government in the middle of the COVID crisis is perhaps a very good case in point. Whether it actually damages trust, I don't know. I mean, firstly, how far trust in some of our institutions can be made much worse, I think, is a moot point, frankly, from where we are at the moment. And it may be, in some senses, that if it's seen to be a strong local voice, that actually helps in terms of the system, that there is a sense that there is capacity for that local voice to be articulated. So some and some, I think. But yes, I suspect you will see more of that. And it may, going back to the point you raised about political complexion, it may be the more so, depending on the political complexion of some of those elected to mayoral roles.
Interesting. Ariane, do you want to come in next?
Yeah, I wanted to come in. I fully agree with what Roger said. I just wanted to add a point on the mayor, if I may. On the real empowering factor, I agree with Roger that at the moment the focus is on mayors because of their strategic power and role, but I think that the focus should actually be on getting towards a system that focuses on collaboration. There is a lot of evidence, for example, from the OECD that shows that in order to make devolution work, you really have to have a system of collaboration within devolved institutions, but also across in a vertical sense between different levels of government. So I think this is not to say that the mayor should have less power or not have that strategic power, but that should be tightly connected to a system that is based on the principle of collaboration. On the question as to whether the field in a way is going to become too crowded, I agree again with Roger. There is a risk that could be happening, but I think that we should also be looking in a critical way at what the field already looks like now, and the fact that not all mayors are equal, not all mayors have the same kind of visibility, not all mayors have the same kind of approach to their role. So we should also take into consideration the fact that, for example, what matters is the kind of vertical relations that mayors can develop with central government that may vary from time to time, depending on whether or not there is alignment between the political party of the mayor in question and the one in central government. But another point that can make the difference is the experience of mayors. Some mayors don't come from a political background; others are very much political creatures. And we've seen, if we look at the landscape at the moment, we see that the mayors that get more visibility and perhaps also a kind of a more of a direct, more kind of leverage on central governments are the mayors that have more political experience or that have been able to develop very quickly skills in that sense. So this is also something that needs to be taken into consideration. On the final point on related also to the first past the post system to elect metro mayors, from what I understand, actually one of the things that is going to be included in the English devolution bill is actually going back to reintroduce the supplementary system, supplementary vote system for the election of metro mayor. So here we might already see, a change of scene, probably on the back of as a way of preventing the election of probably reform metro mayors, as we've been seeing happening in the last round of elections.
How very interesting. I've been sensing the government's been a bit cool on that in recent months. So it's interesting if you're picking up something different. We shall see very soon, I guess, whether it's in there or not.
The MJ has got a headline that says so, but let's see.
Gosh, fascinating. Bella. Oh, you're still muted, Bella.
Is a scourge of our age. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Excellent questions. Thanks very much for the thoughtful contributions. So to the first one on, is the role of the mayor overplayed? Is it actually about the collaboration? I think it's about both of those things. And I think it's also about the new sort of powers by default that will be included in this bill that, all mayors will have and is kind of integral to what the mayor and the strategic authority will have in their gift. But then also what more powers might be coming down the line. So I think sort of almost like with anything, you need checks and balances to ensure that you're doing the collaboration. Ideally you will have a strategic and visionary mayor as well. But I think the system that government's trying to create will mean, even if you have a mayor that is a bit of a dud or doesn't really have the vision or isn't really driving things forward, the fact that you're bringing your local authorities together to collaborate and deliver, and the fact that there are these kind of strategic powers that will enable you to do things, just even if it is mainly the local authorities collaborating and driving things forward, will mean that there will be progress. So I think it's about setting up the system so that ideally, if all of it's firing on all of its cylinders, you can do amazing things. And I think, we've already got some, mayors that are absolutely delivering on that. But, even if there are issues or, there might be disagreements politically, there is still going to be something that can be delivered. And I think that's the kind of key balance that the government needs to create. On the issue of, if it's a crowded field, I think, what we're talking about here is constitution, really fundamental constitutional reform. This is no longer about the kind of ad hoc doing deals. It may be depending a bit more on a particular mayor's personality. This is about really saying, no, we're going to take regional government seriously again, and create the sort of systems and the constitutional systems, like the Mayor's Council, the Leaders' Council, already up and running, that really ensure there is proper dialogue happening between central, regional and local government in a way that, as I identified, my opening remarks, just doesn't exist at the moment in certain places that don't already have devolution. And then to the point, I think it's clear from sort of polling actually that, the more local the connection, the more residents can see, somebody delivering real visible change in their communities. Whether that's through local government or regional government, that the trust indexes are higher than for national politicians that I think inevitably can seem more remote. So I actually think by enhancing local government and the ability of local and regional government to deliver, the government will also be working towards the objective of restoring some trust in our systems, which is so, you know, as Roger identified, so badly needed.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Back to Tom for another round of questions.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So these are three sort of questions on different areas of what we've been discussing this afternoon. The first is from Aidan Rylett, and he asks, what are the panel members' thoughts on what the, quote, devolution revolution means for third sector engagement and involvement in service design and delivery? Andrew Lasser asks, parish councils and parish meetings are the most local level of government in England, so why do they seem to have been left out of the conversation around devolution? What does that say about how we think about local power and decision making? And then Keith Raffan says, following Scotland's example, wouldn't the introduction of proportional representation for local government help make it more responsive to and representative of public opinion, not least by making one-party domination less likely?
Great, thank you. Arianna, do you want to go first in this round?
I will do, Alan. Maybe in the interest of time, I will just
don't
focus.
feel you need to answer all the questions.
Exactly. I'll focus on the one on town and parish councils, because I think it's a very important one and something that is not so often discussed. When we talk about subnational governance or regional and local government, we tend to forget that, you know, we also have parish councils, and it is true they are the level of government that operates really closer to communities. I think it is a big missed opportunities that there is no mention basically of the role of town and parish councils in the English devolution white paper. And I think that again, going back to the point on subsidiarity, the issue is that parish councils are not there everywhere in England, but subnational governance in England is messy almost by default. So I'm not saying that we should create parish council where there aren't some, but I think we can also see examples, as in the case of Cornwall, for instance, where you have areas with a diffuse kind of network of parish council. They can make a difference in really, first of all, in kind of providing that bridge that is almost like the backbone of local democracy, creating that connection with communities at the very, very local level. So I fully agree on the point of on parish councils, and I think that, and I hope that you know, if the English Devolution White Paper takes the principle of subsidiarity seriously, that will mean that finally we will also see a little bit of justice for these local institutions too, because they do, where they are present, they do play a very important role.
Great, thank you. Roger.
Okay, just picking up a little bit on each of the three. Impact on the third sector. I'm not sure there's a direct one, certainly from the mayoral devolution element. I think that that there may well be one when you get to the level of things like, and I mentioned this before, but the sort of neighbourhood health plans and model and approaches of that kind, because there is no doubt that particularly if you build in a more community power focused approach to these things, which government has talked about it, and we await seeing more of the work that Georgia Gould at the Cabinet Office has been doing on that, then it is highly likely, frankly, that the voluntary and community sector is a really important part of that, and it does help to shape some of the decisions that are taken. So I think there is potentially an impact, probably again, more through the public service reform dimension of this than the mayoral side of things as such. Parish councils, yes, I'm actually delighted that was brought up, because it's worth saying a couple of points. One is, I think Arianna mentioned earlier on, we already, pre all this, had the biggest units of lowest tier local government anywhere in the advanced world, I think, certainly right up there. And of course, many a parish would be of a comparable size to many a French commune, in fact, in many cases bigger. Now, of course, many parishes are set up, as we know, on the basis of essentially volunteer activity with then a clerk, or maybe a clerk and an assistant clerk. It's it's an interesting question as to how much structure you have in that. Town councils, of course, can quite often be a little bit more structured. But when we were taking forward our devolution proposals in Kent, then both the leader of Medway, Vince Maple, and I were in extensive discussions with the town and parish councils across the county. My read is that, as I think Arianna said, there's not that much mention of it. And I suspect the focus will be on, as I say, on things like area committees. And the question is, how much do parishes fit into that? But in principle, I think seeking to engage them is a good and important idea. PR in local government, there have always been the arguments on this, which pretty much parallel those nationally. I think it goes with an argument as to what degree our overall political system has changed, and we are now fundamentally in such a heterogeneous multi-party system that what was set up for a two-party structure may no longer apply, and certainly yields much more disproportionate results. So I think the case for it has certainly got stronger.
Very interesting. And Bella, finally.
Thanks. So I think there are some exciting potentials and opportunities for more third sector involvement in delivery. You know, we've got a very vibrant third sector here in Brighton and Hove. We already have very close working relationships. And as somebody that's come from the charity sector myself, I am certainly of the view that, you know, oftentimes community organizations that will be closest to people, that can have a real expert, sometimes lived experience led lens on issues and particular barriers or challenges facing some of our residents, will often understand best what the answers are and how you design out the challenges from the system that you're trying to create. So I know, for example, that in Greater Manchester, there's been some really important work with women's organisations working on the homelessness issue. So I think, you know, with mayoral authorities being able to take a bit more of a strategic view, I think there is real potential there. I know as well, for example, in my area, that many of the organisations that might have their base in Brighton and Hove actually operate already Sussex-wide. They've sort of devolved before we have. And so I think, you know, that again, there's more potential for certain alignments. I think much of it, you know, as with anything, might depend a bit on the culture and the approach taken by those operating the mayoral strategic authorities, both from the unitaries and from the mayor. But I think that you've already seen some positive examples of how it can actually support that kind of co-delivery and service design. And I think that's definitely something we'll be looking to try and deliver here in Brighton and Hove. On parish councils and local power, look, you know, I think the whole thing with how local democracy, like really local grassroots democracy works, is that can never really be something that is prescripted from above. In Brighton and Hove, we've got one parish council in Rottingdean. They do a fantastic job, and clearly, you know, really are able to keep that like strong sense of community voice and identity. I wouldn't for a minute want to be trying to impose that model on other parts of the city that haven't kind of generated it themselves. So I think you do really need to keep that flexibility in terms of what's going to work well. You know, I think the role that the parish council plays in one part of my city is then performed by actually other organisations that exist in a different way with different structures in other parts of the city. So it will really vary, and I think you have to allow that flexibility for something that happens at the local level. I think, you know, the government is right in its mission to say they want you know, some form of that kind of local, very localised governance to exist, but there needs to be flexibility. And then on PR, look, Brighton and Hove had no overall political control for 20 years. I'm not aware of another unitary of our size that has kind of lived with that social experiment for as long as we did here in the city. My own view is that it was pretty disastrous for the city and for residents, because what you didn't ever have in that period is any kind of clear vision and idea of where the city was going, with kind of clear priorities, clear accountability, being able to, you know, say to officers, this is the direction we're going. Instead, you had policy by lowest common denominator, which in my view ended up with stagnation. So I'm not in favour of moving towards a kind of political system that might deliver more of that, what ultimately boils down to kind of uncertainty and lack of action. I believe in the importance of strong government, and I believe that a system that can deliver, majorities that allow government to then deliver on, what they've laid out in manifestos is preferable.
Fascinating. We could keep this conversation going for quite some time, but sadly we have run out of time, so we won't be able to get to the third round of questions. Apologies to those of you who might have been on that round, but it's been great to hear the questions that we have. Before I thank the questions, the speakers rather, just a few points to make at the end. The recording of this seminar will appear on our YouTube channel and our podcast feed in the coming days. So please do subscribe to those or look out for information on Blue Sky. This is our final event before the summer break. So we hope you all have a restful time over the coming months, at least once you've read the bill. But once after you've read the bill, then be great to have a restful time. So we'll be advertising events for our autumn programme in due course. Do sign up to our events mailing list if you haven't done so already in order to hear about those events. Just follow the Get Involved link on the Constitution Unit's website. So with that, let me thank all of you in the audience for attending today, especially those of you who put in such good questions, and sorry we didn't get to all of them, but especially let me thank our terrific panel of speakers. I've learnt so much over the last hour and a bit. So Bella Sankey, Roger Goff and Arianna Giovannini, thank you all so much. And thank you also to Tom for fielding the questions and Ed Rowe in the background for running the tech side of things. Good afternoon to all of you, and we look forward to seeing all of you again very soon. Bye-bye.